Funerals are where the dead rest. But for my family, it was where the war began, when the lawyer placed a rusted tackle box before me. My cousin laughed. They received skyscrapers and $50 million trusts. I received Grandma's trash. But they forgot she never acted without purpose. If she left me shark bait, it was because she knew I was the only one capable of hunting the real monsters sitting right next to me. My name is Darlene Wainwright, and at 32 years old, I have spent the better part of my adult life bringing dead things back to life. As a restoration specialist for antique artifacts, I understand the patience required to strip away layers of grime, the delicate touch needed to mend fractured porcelain, and the chemical precision required to remove varnish that has yellowed with decades of neglect. I see the cracks that others miss. I see the structural weaknesses hidden beneath layers of gold leaf. So, when I stepped out of the brutal gray slush of a Chicago winter and into the limestone fortress that housed the law offices of Vance and Halloway, I did not see a grieving family gathering to mourn a matriarch. I saw a facade, beautifully constructed but rotting from the inside out, waiting for the slightest pressure to shatter it into dust. The blizzard outside was howling, a whiteout condition that had grounded flights and paralyzed the city transit. But inside the 42nd floor conference room, the air was still, warm, and scented expensive leather and stale coffee. I shook the melting snow from my coat. Conscious of how the cheap synthetic fabric rustled too loudly in the quiet room, I hung it on the rack beside 3 coats that likely cost more than my entire year's rent: a cashmere trench, a structured wool overcoat that looked like military garb, and a fur-lined parka that had probably never seen actual weather. I turned to face them. The Sterling family. My blood, technically, though the connection felt as thin and brittle as old paper. Uncle Marcus sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a position he had assumed naturally, as if the seat had been molded to his frame. He was the CEO of Sterling Maritime now, a role he had been salivating over for 20 years while my grandmother held the reins with an iron grip. He did not look up when I entered. He was busy typing something on his phone, his thumb moving with aggressive speed. Beside him sat Aunt Rosalind. She was a woman who had turned herself into a brand, a fashion designer whose aesthetic was severe minimalism. She wore black, of course, but it was a structural, architectural black dress that screamed high fashion rather than mourning. She was examining her manicure, checking for flaws that did not exist. And then there was Pierce, my cousin. He was sprawled in his chair, legs stretched out, playing with a heavy gold lighter, flipping the lid open and closed. Clink, clink, clink. He looked at me, his eyes sliding over my damp boots and frizzing hair, with a boredom that was more insulting than hatred. "You are late," Pierce said, not checking his watch. "The elevators are slow," I said, taking the only empty chair at the far end of the table, the one furthest from the power center. "And the streets are a mess." "We managed," Rosalind said, her voice light and airy, like she was discussing a minor inconvenience at a gala rather than a blizzard. She still did not look at me. No one asked how I was. No one offered a condolence. The silence that settled back over the room was heavy, not with grief, but with anticipation. They were vultures circling a carcass, waiting for the permission to feed. The door at the other end of the room opened, and Arthur Vance entered. He was the executor of my grandmother's estate, a man who had served Eleanor Sterling for 40 years. His face looked like it had been carved from candle wax, smooth and pale, with eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. He carried a leather portfolio in one hand and a thick file in the other. He sat down opposite Marcus, placing the documents on the table with a precise, deliberate movement. "Good afternoon," Vance said. His voice was dry, like shifting sand. "We are all here. Let us proceed." He opened the file. The sound of the paper turning was the loudest noise in Chicago. "I will dispense with the preamble," Vance stated, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Eleanor Sterling was a woman of efficiency. Her last will and testament reflects that." I watched Marcus straighten his tie. I saw Rosalind hold her breath. Pierce finally stopped clicking his lighter. To my eldest son, Marcus Sterling, Vance read, his eyes scanning the page. I bequeath the controlling interest in Sterling Maritime Group, including all voting shares and operational authority. Furthermore, I leave to him the sum of $50 million to be paid from the liquid assets of the estate, with the hope that he finally learns the difference between price and value. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like a hiss of steam. He nodded, a tight, grim smile playing on his lips. He had won. The empire was his. The $50 million was just the cherry on top. It was the power he had craved. He glanced at Rosalind, a look of pure dominance. To my daughter-in-law, Rosalind Sterling, Vance continued, I bequeath my personal real estate portfolio, including the penthouse on the Gold Coast, the villa in Tuscany, and the estate in the Hamptons. These properties possess a combined appraised value of $30 million. May you find the warmth in them that you never found in this family. Rosalind's eyes widened. She touched her throat, feigning shock. But I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. $30 million in real estate. She was already mentally redecorating, planning which ones to sell to fund her failing fashion line. To my grandson, Pierce Sterling, Vance said. Pierce sat up straighter. I bequeath my collection of vintage automobiles, currently housed in the climate-controlled garage at the Lake Geneva property, and a trust fund in the amount of $10 million, to be dispersed in monthly installments over the next 20 years to ensure he does not starve due to his own lack of ambition. Pierce scoffed, rolling his eyes at the insult. But he was grinning. $10 million and the cars. He could live with the jab at his character. He had never cared what Grandma thought of him, only what she could give him. And then, the room went quiet. The three of them, Marcus, Rosalind, Pierce, shifted in their seats, turning their collective gaze toward me. The air grew thinner. I felt my heart hampering against my ribs. A dull thudding sound in my ears. I did not expect money. I knew they hated me because Grandma had loved me, because I was the daughter of her rebellious second son who had walked away from the business. But I expected something, a token, an acknowledgement that I existed. Mr. Vance did not look at a paper for this part. He reached down beside his chair and lifted something onto the table. It was a tackle box. It was not a metaphorical box. It was a literal, physical, metal tackle box from the 1950s. The green paint was chipped and peeling, revealing patches of dark orange rust underneath. The latch was oxidized. It smelled, sharply and pungently, of old machine oil, dried salt water, and fish. He placed it on the polished mahogany table. The contrast was violent. The rusted metal against the mirror-like wood surface looked like a wound. To my granddaughter, Darlene, Vance read, his voice softening just a fraction. A shift so subtle only a listener looking for it would hear. The only one of my blood who had the patience to sit silently by the lake without checking a watch or demanding a reward. I leave you my old tackle box, and everything contained within it. Silence. I stared at the box. I knew this box. I had spent hundreds of hours staring at this box while sitting on a rocking boat in the middle of Lake Michigan, freezing my fingers off while Grandma taught me how to tie knots. Is that it? Pierce asked, his voice cracking with suppressed laughter. Vance looked at him over his glasses. That is the entirety of the bequest for Ms. Wainwright. No cash? Marcus asked, his voice dripping with a fake, oily concern that was far worse than his son's mockery. No stocks? No property? The will is specific, Vance said. The tackle box. And its contents? Pierce burst out laughing. It was a harsh, barking sound. Oh, this is rich. This is classic Grandma. She finally lost it at the end, didn't she? Or maybe she just finally realized what you are worth. Darlene, scrap metal. Pierce, Rosalind said. But she was smiling too. A cruel, tight smile. Be polite. Perhaps there are some antique hooks in there Darlene can restore. She likes trash, doesn't she? I sat frozen. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a sudden, sharp clarity, they were enjoying this. This was better for them than the millions of dollars. Seeing me humiliated, seeing me reduced to zero, validated every cruel thing they had ever thought about me. To them, I was the poor relation, the failure, the one who worked with her hands. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, looking at me with eyes that shone with triumph. Darlene, look, I know this is disappointing. If you need help with the cab fare home, or if you need to borrow a few $100s to get through the month, you can ask the secretary on your way out. We are family, after all. The condescension washed over me like ice water. I looked at the box. I looked at the rust. I remembered the weight of the rod in my hand. I remembered the gray mornings on the water, the fog rolling in. Just me and Eleanor, the biggest fish, she had told me once, as we waited for a muskellunge that never surfaced. Is not the one splashing around on the surface making a scene. It is the one lying still in the deep, in the dark, waiting for the shadow to pass before it strikes. She had not left me money. She had left me rust. Eleanor Sterling was a billionaire. She did not make mistakes. She did not do random things. She was a woman who planned her business strategies 10 years in advance. If she left me this box, it was not an insult. It was a message. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through Pierce's snickering. I do not need your cab fare, Marcus, I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. And I do not need your pity. I reached out and grabbed the handle of the tackle box. It was heavy, shockingly heavy. I work with metal and wood every day. I know what a box of fishing lures should weigh. A box this size, filled with standard lead weights and plastic lures, should weigh perhaps 5 or 6 pounds. This felt like 20 pounds. It felt like I was lifting a block of solid lead. I did not let my arm sag. I did not show the strain. I gripped the handle until my knuckles turned white, keeping my face completely impassive. Sign here, Ms. Wainwright, Vance said, sliding a document toward me. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name, Darlene Wainwright, in a clean, sharp script. Enjoy the scrapyard. Darlene, Pierce called out as I turned to leave. Don't get tetanus. I walked to the door, the heavy box pulling at my shoulder socket. I could feel their eyes on my back. Marcus's victorious stare, Rosalind's amused disdain, Pierce's mockery. They thought they had stripped me bare. They thought they had cut me out of the legacy. I stepped out of the conference room and into the hallway. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, muting their laughter. I stood there for a moment in the silence of the corridor, clutching the rusted handle of the box. The smell of machine oil and the sea wafted up from it, overpowering the sterile scent of the law firm. It was just a box of old fishing lures. That was what the will said. That was what they saw. But as I walked toward the elevator, dragging the weight of my inheritance with me, I knew one thing for certain. Eleanor Sterling had never gone fishing without a plan to catch something massive, and she had just handed me the rod. I pressed the down button. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. I stepped inside, alone with my rust and my questions, as the doors slid shut on the $50 million celebrations happening down the hall. Let them laugh. The water is deep, and I have always been patient. My apartment in the suburbs was a universe away from the glass and steel canyons of downtown Chicago. It was a converted loft in a building that used to manufacture textiles, drafty in the winter and stifling in the summer. But it had the one thing I valued above all else: space. Specifically, workspace. The entire living room had been surrendered to my trade. High-lumen magnifying lamps on swing arms, ventilation hoods, shelves lined with labeled jars of solvents and pigments, and a sturdy, expansive workbench made of sealed maple dominated the room. This was my sanctuary. This was where I fixed things that other people had broken or forgotten. I set the tackle box down on the center of the workbench, the heavy thud vibrating through the wood. Under the clinical white light of my inspection lamps, the box looked even more wretched than it had in the boardroom. The green paint was bubbled like diseased skin, and the rust on the corners was flaking off in fine, orange dust, but as I ran my hand over the lid, I felt the cold, unyielding solidity of the metal. This was not the cheap, stamped aluminum you bought at a big box store today. This was heavy-gauge steel, probably manufactured in the early 1950s, built to survive a nuclear winter, or at the very least, a clumsy fisherman dropping it on a rocky pier. I pulled up my stool and sat down, peeling off my coat. The silence here was different. It was not the loaded, predatory silence of the law firm. It was an expectant silence, the kind that comes before a diagnosis. I unlatched the front clasp. It gave a stiff, resistant squeal of metal on metal before snapping open. I lifted the lid. The cantilevered trays rose up like a small, mechanical city unfolding. The smell hit me instantly, a pungent cocktail of old rubber, lead, and the ghost of lake water. The trays were crammed with lures. There were hundreds of them, wooden plugs with glass eyes, metal spoons tarnished black, rubber worms that had partially melted into sticky abstract shapes, and feathery jigs that disintegrated into dust as I blew on them. To anyone else, it was a box of garbage. To Pierce, it was a joke. To Marcus, it was a symbol of my worthlessness. But I knew this collection. My hand hovered over a red and white striped spoon. Suddenly, I was 10 years old again, shivering in a thick wool sweater on the deck of Grandma's boat, the Iron Lady. It was 5 a.m, the sun just a bruised purple line on the horizon of Lake Michigan. My cousins were back at the estate, sleeping in silk sheets, probably dreaming of ponies and race cars. They never came fishing. It was too cold, too boring, too smelly. Grandma never forced them. She just took me. "Look at the water. Darlene," she would say, her voice gravelly from the morning air. "What do you see?" "Waves," I would venture. "Chaos," she would correct, baiting a hook with a live worm that wriggled frantically. "Surface noise. Everyone looks at the waves, but the money is not in the waves. The money is in the current underneath. You have to know what they are hungry for down there. You cannot feed a bass a walleye lure and expect a bite. You have to speak their language." She treated fishing like a hostile takeover. Every cast was a negotiation. Every catch was a closed deal. I blinked the memory away. The boat was gone. Grandma was gone. I was alone with her tools. I began the process of cataloging. It was instinct. I reached for a pair of cotton gloves and a set of non-marring tweezers. I started removing the lures one by one, laying them out on a white microfiber cloth in rows. I needed to see if there was anything hidden in the chaotic jumble. A note? A deed? A diamond ring stuffed inside a rubber worm? Nothing, just lures. I picked up a vintage creek chub pike minnow, a wooden lure with a metal lip. It was beautifully carved, the paint chipped to reveal the cedar underneath. I turned it over in my hands. Then I picked up a river runt spook, then a daredevil spoon. My hands moved with the rhythm of years of practice. I weighed them, turned them, checked the hooks. Then, my fingers closed around a mid-sized swim bait. It was painted to look like a minnow, silver with a blue back, the kind of lure used for trolling deep waters. It looked ordinary. It was scratched, with a few teeth marks near the tail. But as I rolled it between my thumb and forefinger, something felt wrong. Balance. In restoration, you learn how objects should feel. A porcelain vase has a specific center of gravity. A silver candlestick carries its weight at the base. This lure, a simple piece of painted wood and plastic, felt dense. Not just heavy, but specifically dense in the belly, slightly forward of where the center of mass should be for a swimming action. If you cast this, it would not wobble like a wounded fish. It would sink like a stone. Grandma did not keep broken gear. If a lure did not swim right, it went overboard. I brought the minnow up to the magnifying lens. The surface was covered in a layer of grime and oxidized varnish. I reached for a bottle of mild solvent, a mixture I used for cleaning oil paintings without stripping the pigment. I dipped a cotton swab into the liquid and began to gently rub the belly of the lure. The grime came away in black smears on the cotton. I worked in small circles, patient, methodical. Beneath the dirt, the silver paint was dull but intact. I cleaned the entire length of the lure. Wiping it dry with a clean cloth, I held it up again, still nothing but silver paint. I frowned. I trusted my hands. The weight was wrong. I switched on the ultraviolet lamp attached to the side of my desk. In the restoration world, UV light is a truth teller. It reveals overpainting, repairs, and things the naked eye misses. The room bathed in a soft, purple glow. I held the lure under the beam. There it was, on the belly of the lure, right where the weight felt heaviest. The light caught the edges of an incision. It was incredibly faint, sealed over with a clear, unreflective lacquer that was invisible under normal light. But under UV, the lacquer fluoresced a different shade than the original varnish. I swapped my cotton swab for a high-grit polishing pad, the kind used for jewelry. I buffed the area gently, removing the top layer of the sealant, under the magnifying glass, etched directly into the metal ballast weight embedded in the lure's belly. Were numbers. They were micro-engravings, the kind you need a jeweler's loupe to read clearly. I grabbed my loupe and pressed my eye against it. 41 degrees, 52 minutes, 48 seconds. North, 87 degrees, 37 minutes, 12 seconds, west. Coordinates. My heart skipped a beat. A physical thump against my sternum. These were not random numbers. This was a precise location. I grabbed a pencil and scribbled them down on the butcher paper covering my workbench. I looked at the lure again. Why this one? Why hide it here? Because only someone who actually picked up the gear, who actually handled it with care, would notice. Pierce would have thrown the box in a dumpster. Marcus would have let it rot in an attic. I looked back at the box. If the lure was the map, was the box just the container? I stood up and lifted the tackle box again. The weight that had strained my arm in the elevator bothered me. I emptied the remaining trays, dumping the rest of the lures onto the table. The box was empty now, just a hollow metal shell. I placed it on a digital scale I used for weighing pigments. 8 pounds, 4 ounces. I took a set of calipers and measured the exterior depth of the box, from the bottom rim to the lip. Then I opened it and measured the interior depth. I stared at the measurements. There was a discrepancy. The outside depth was 6 inches. The inside depth was 5.5 inches, half an inch. The metal of the box was thick, but it was not half an inch thick. There was a void. I flipped the box over. The bottom was a solid sheet of rusted steel, pitted and scarred. It looked seamless. I ran a strong magnet over it. It stuck everywhere. Solid steel. I flipped it back over and looked at the inside floor. It was painted the same dull green as the rest of the interior. I ran my fingers along the seams where the floor met the walls. It was smooth, too smooth. There were no welding marks, no rivets on the inside to match the ones on the outside. It was a friction fit, a false floor pressed in with such precision that it looked like the original bottom. I needed suction. I grabbed a heavy-duty glass suction cup, the kind used for moving window panes. I pressed it against the bottom of the empty box interior and locked the handle down. I pulled. The box lifted off the table. The floor held fast. "Come on, Eleanor," I whispered. "How did you lock it?" I looked at the coordinates again. Then I looked at the minnow lure. The weight in the lure was magnetic. I had felt the pull when I moved my tools near it. I picked up the minnow. I ran it slowly along the inside edges of the box floor. Click, a soft, mechanical sound, like a tumbler's falling into place. It came from the back left corner. I moved the lure to the back right corner. Click. I pulled on the suction cup again, this time with a groan of air rushing into a vacuum. The false floor popped up. My breath hitched. I lifted the metal plate away. Beneath the rusted, battered exterior of a 1950 tackle box lay a compartment lined with black velvet, pristine and dust-free. And sitting in the center of the velvet, secured by a foam cutout, was a single object. It was not gold. It was not diamonds. It was a key, but not a metal key. It was a thick black rectangle made of matte polycarbonate, with a complex magnetic strip running down one side and a holographic chip embedded in the center. It looked like something that belonged in a high-security server farm, not a fishing box. I picked it up. It was light, modern, and utterly incongruous with its surroundings. On the back of the key, printed in small white letters, were the words, Deep Lake Holdings, Level 5 Access, Deep Lake Holdings. I had never heard of it, and I knew the names of every subsidiary under the Sterling Maritime umbrella. I had spent enough boring holiday dinners listening to Marcus brag about them. Sterling Logistics, Sterling Freight, Sterling Harbor Services. Deep Lake was a ghost. I looked at the coordinates I had written down. I pulled out my phone and typed them into the map application. The pin dropped on the screen. It was not in the city. It was an industrial area south of Chicago, right on the edge of the Calumet River where it fed into Lake Michigan, a desolate stretch of old steel mills and abandoned shipping yards. What did you build? Grandma? I asked the silent room. The key felt warm in my hand. This was not just a safety deposit box key. This was an access pass, a master key. My phone buzzed on the workbench, vibrating against the hard wood, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the key. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. Hey, Darlene, it's Pierce. Look, Dad is feeling sentimental. He wants the tackle box for his office. Nostalgia, you know? We will give you $10,000 for it, cash, tonight. Consider it charity. Don't be stupid. I stared at the words. $10,000. For a box of rust. 10 minutes ago. They were laughing at me. They had humiliated me in front of the executor, treated me like a beggar. Now, suddenly, they wanted the trash back? Marcus did not have a sentimental bone in his body. He would not pay $10 for nostalgia, let alone $10,000. They knew, or at least, they suspected. They did not know what was in it, or they would have never let me walk out of that room, but they realized too late that Eleanor Sterling never gave anything away for free. The paranoia had set in the moment I left the building. They were terrified that the scrap metal might be worth something, and they wanted to buy it back for pennies before I figured it out. Control. It was always about control. They could not stand the idea of me having even a rusted hinge if they could not own it first. I looked at the high-tech key in my hand. I looked at the coordinates pointing to a wasteland on the river, and then I looked at the message from Pierce. I typed a reply. Sorry. Pierce, I'm going fishing. I hit send. Then I blocked the number, slipped the magnetic key into my pocket, and grabbed my coat. The blizzard was still raging outside, but for the first time in years, I did not feel the cold. I felt the heat of the hunt. The drive south was a journey into the graveyard of American industry. I followed the navigation on my phone past the gleaming skyline of downtown, past the gentrified lofts, until the roads turned cracked and pitted, lined with the skeletal remains of steel mills and factories that had died decades ago. The blizzard had turned the landscape into a ghostly monochrome blur. Snow piled up against rusted chain-link fences and capped the smokestacks that stood like tombstones against the gray sky. My destination was a coordinate, not an address. It led me to the edge of the Calumet River, a place where the water looked like oil and the air tasted of sulfur even in the dead of winter. I pulled my beat-up sedan up to a massive corrugated metal gate topped with razor wire. A faded, peeling sign hung crookedly from the mesh. Sterling Maritime Storage, permanently closed. It looked abandoned. It looked like the kind of place where teenagers came to break windows, or where stolen cars were stripped for parts. The main warehouse building behind the fence was a hulking brick structure with boarded-up windows and a collapsed loading dock. If I had been anyone else, I would have turned around. I would have assumed the GPS was wrong or that Grandma had sent me on a fool's errand to teach me some obscure lesson about humility. But I restored antiques for a living. I knew that the layer of dust was often applied intentionally to protect what lay beneath. I cut the engine. The silence was absolute. Save for the wind whistling through the wire fence, I scanned the perimeter, my eyes, trained to spot the hairline fracture in a Ming vase. caught the anomaly immediately. On the rusted utility pole to the left of the gate, there was a black dome. It was small, dusty, and blended perfectly with the transformer box it was mounted on. But the lens was clean. No snow had accumulated on it. That meant it was heated. And as I shifted in my seat, the lens swiveled a fraction of an inch. It was a military-grade thermal tracking camera. I stepped out of the car, the wind biting through my layers. I walked up to the gate. Clutching the magnetic key in my pocket, I did not have to wait long. A side door in the warehouse opened, and a figure emerged. He walked with a heavy, deliberate gait, ignoring the biting cold. As he got closer to the gate, I recognized the silhouette. It was a man I had seen in the background of my grandmother's life for as long as I could remember. He was never at the dinner parties, never in the boardrooms. He was the man driving the car when she went to inspect the shipyards at midnight. He was the shadow standing by the door when she had private meetings. Sully. He looked older now, his face a roadmap of deep lines carved by weather and time, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He wore a thick canvas coat and a watch cap pulled low. He stopped on the other side of the gate and looked me up and down, his breath pluming in the air. "You took your time, Darlene," he said. His voice was like grinding gravel. "I have been thawing the coffee for a week. I had to go fishing first," I replied, the code feeling strange on my tongue. Sully's stoic expression cracked into a faint, grim smile. He punched a code into a keypad hidden inside a rusted electrical box. The heavy gate groaned, the motors whining with a sound that was far too smooth for something that looked so neglected. The gate slid open just enough for me to slip through. "Leave the car," he said. "Nobody comes down here, and if they do, the plates are already logged." I followed him toward the warehouse. Up close, the deception was even more impressive. The boarded-up windows were actually reinforced steel shutters painted to look like plywood. The collapsed loading dock was a hydraulic ramp in the lowered position. "She knew they would try to buy it back," Sully said, not looking back as he walked. "Pierce sent you a text, didn't he?" $10,000, I said. Sully snorted. "Cheap bastards. They are going to wish they offered $1 billion. He led me to a heavy steel door on the side of the building. There was no handle, only a flat black panel. Sully stepped aside and nodded at me. "The key," he instructed. I pulled the polycarbonate key from my pocket. I held it up to the panel. A soft chime sounded, and a green light pulsed, but the door did not open. Instead, a section of the wall at eye level slid back, revealing a glass scanner. "Lean in," Sully said. "Left eye." I hesitated. "My retina? How? I never—" Then I remembered. 6 months ago, Grandma had insisted I go to her private specialist for an eye exam. She claimed glaucoma ran in the family. I had thought she was just being her usual controlling self. Micromanaging my health. I sat in that chair, staring into the machine while lights flashed and scanned, thinking I was getting a prescription. I was getting digitized. She had been planning this handover while I was still worrying about my rent. I leaned in. The red beam scanned my eye. Identity confirmed. "Welcome. Director Wainwright." The computerized voice was cool and synthetic. The heavy steel door hissed, the seals breaking, and swung inward on silent hinges. I stepped across the threshold, and the world changed. I left the rusted, freezing industrial wasteland behind and stepped into the future. The air inside was crisp, filtered, and maintained at a perfect 68 degrees. The lighting was not the harsh fluorescent of an office, but a soft, ambient blue glow that emanated from the floor and ceiling. The space was cavernous. The warehouse had been gutted and transformed into a fortress of technology. Rows of server racks, humming with quiet power, stretched into the distance like monoliths. To my right, there was a physical archive section, floor-to-ceiling rolling shelves made of stainless steel, temperature-controlled and fire-suppressed. In the center of the room was a command station with a circular desk and a bank of monitors that could rival NASA. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "This," Sully said, closing the door behind us and locking out the storm. "Is the engine room, the real one." He walked over to the command station and tapped a few keys. The screens flared to life, displaying maps, schematics, and live data streams. "Eleanor knew Marcus was going to sell," Sully said, his voice echoing with disgust. "She knew it 5 years ago. Marcus does not care about shipping. He cares about liquidity. He has been in secret talks with the consortium in Shanghai to sell off the fleet and the logistics network the moment she died. He wants to cash out and live on a yacht in the Mediterranean." I walked slowly toward the screens, trying to comprehend the scale of what I was seeing. "So she stopped him?" I asked. "No," Sully corrected. "She let him have it. She let him have the ships. She let him have the buildings. She let him have the brand name." He pulled up a schematic on the main screen. It showed the corporate structure of Sterling Maritime. It looked like a giant tree. "This is what Marcus thinks he inherited," Sully said. Then he pressed a button. The tree dismantled. The ships, the buildings, the physical inventory, they remained under Marcus's name, but the roots, the things that actually made the company function, detached and floated away to a separate entity. Eleanor spent the last 5 years stripping the intellectual property, the proprietary logistics software, the green tech patents for the new hydrogen engines, and the exclusive rights to the Arctic shipping lanes out of the main company, Sully explained. "She moved them all here, to a holding company that exists only on paper and in this room." "Deep Lake Holdings," I said, reading the name on the screen. "Deep Lake owns the software that tells Marcus's ships where to go," Sully said. "Deep Lake owns the patent on the fuel injectors those ships need to run legally in European waters next year. Deep Lake owns the rights to the only viable deep-water ports in the new trade routes." He turned to me, his expression grave. "Sterling Maritime, the company Marcus is popping champagne over right now, is a hollow shell. It is a taxi company that does not own the cars or the maps. They are just driving the vehicles. You own the road, you own the gas, and you own the license." I stared at the screen. The magnitude of it was staggering. Marcus had $50 million and a fleet of aging ships. I had the nervous system of the entire global operation, without Deep Lake. Sterling Maritime was just a collection of rusting metal floating in the water. "Why?" I asked. "Why destroy her own legacy?" "She did not destroy it," Sully said softly. "She saved it. From him. She knew Marcus would strip it for parts. So she stripped it first and gave the heart to the only person she trusted not to sell it for a quick buck." He gestured to the servers. "The valuation of the assets in this room is roughly 3 times the market cap of the current Sterling Maritime Group, but they are dark assets. They do not show up on the public balance sheets because they are privately held, by you." I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a restorer, hands that cleaned old paintings and fixed broken chairs. I was used to working with things that had already lived their lives. Now, I was holding the beating heart of a multi-billion-dollar empire. "He is going to find out," I said. "When he tries to sell, the buyers will do due diligence. They will see the patents are gone." "That is exactly right," Sully said. "And when they find out, the stock price will crater. He will be desperate. He will come for you with lawyers, with threats, with everything he has." Sully walked over to a metal cabinet and pulled out a thick binder. He placed it on the desk in front of me. "But Eleanor left you one more thing. She called it the insurance policy. It is all the dirt. Every bribe Marcus paid, every safety regulation he skipped, every corner he cut. It is all here, documented and digitized." I ran my hand over the cool metal of the desk. The room hummed with a low, steady vibration, like a giant cat purring. I thought about the tackle box. The biggest fish lies in the deep. She had not left the company. She had left me the leverage. She had left me the power to turn off the lights on Marcus's entire world with the flip of a switch. "So," Sully said, crossing his arms, "what are your orders, Ms. Wainwright? Do we shut them down tomorrow?" I looked at the screens. watching the live tracking of Sterling ships moving across the Atlantic and Pacific. Little dots of light in the darkness, my dots. No, I said, a calmness settling over me that I had never felt before. Not tomorrow. If we shut them down now, he can claim ignorance. He can play the victim. We need him to commit. We need him to try to sell. We wait until he is standing on the edge of the cliff, thinking he can fly. I turn to Sully. Keep the system running, but lock the administrative access. Let them see the data, but make sure they cannot change a single comma without a password that only I have. Let them panic. Let them wonder why the system is not responding to their commands. Sully grinned. It was a wolfish, predatory thing. The ghost in the machine. Exactly, I said. They wanted to treat me like a ghost? Fine, I will haunt them. I looked around the vast, silent cathedral of data. This was my restoration project now. I was not just fixing a vase. I was going to strip the rot out of my family's legacy, even if I had to burn the house down to do it. And Sully? I added. Yes, ma'am? Get a cot set up. I am not going back to my apartment tonight. I have a lot of reading to do. Already done, Sully said. Welcome home, Darlene. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the invisible billions, while outside the wind howled against the reinforced walls, powerless to get in. Marcus had the title. Pierce had the cars. Rosalind had the houses. But I had the keys to the kingdom, and the gate was closed. The adrenaline from discovering the server farm had barely subsided when Sully placed a thick, leather-bound folio on the desk in front of me. It was not a digital file. It was old school, heavy paper, the kind that lawyers use when they want to make sure something is permanent. You have the keys to the engine room, Sully said, his voice dropping to a respectful murmur. Now you need the manual on how to drive it, and you are going to need a navigator. As if on cue, the heavy steel door I had entered through hissed open again. I expected another security guard or perhaps a technician. I did not expect a woman who looked like she had just walked off the cover of a Forbes magazine, specifically the issue dedicated to the most terrifying people in business. She was in her 60s, with silver hair cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that looked like a weapon. She wore a tailored white suit that was immaculate despite the slush and grime of the world outside. I knew her face. Everyone in Chicago who read the business section knew her face. Agatha Thorne. They called her the White Shark. She had been the lead counsel for the biggest mergers and acquisitions in the Midwest for 3 decades before she abruptly announced her retirement 2 years ago. Rumor was she had burned out. Looking at her now, walking across the server room floor with the stride of a general inspecting the troops, she looked anything but burnt out. She looked ready for war. Darlene, she said. She did not offer a hand to shake. She simply assessed me, her blue eyes scanning me with the same intensity I used when inspecting a cracked veneer. You look like your father, but you have Eleanor's chin. That is promising. Ms. Thorne, I managed to say. I thought you were in the Cayman Islands. I was, she replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down opposite me. For about 3 weeks, it was dreadfully boring. Then Eleanor called me and proposed the most interesting corporate sabotage in history. I came back the next day. She tapped the leather folio on the desk. Do you understand what you are holding, Darlene? The intellectual property, I said. The patents. No, Agatha corrected sharply. You are thinking like a librarian. You need to think like an executioner. That folder is not just a list of assets. It is a chokehold. She opened the file and spun it around so I could see the diagram. It was a legal schematic, far more vicious than the corporate tree Sully had shown me. Sterling Maritime, the entity your Uncle Marcus now controls, operates 24 container ships and manages 6 major logistics hubs, Agatha explained, her voice crisp and precise. However, under maritime law, a commercial vessel cannot operate in international waters without certified compliant software for emissions and navigation. Who owns the license for that software? I looked at the document. Deep Lake Holdings. Correct. Furthermore, the new automated cranes at the logistics hubs run on a proprietary operating system to prevent hacking. Who holds the patent? Deep Lake Holdings, I repeated. And finally, Agatha said, leaning forward, the insurance underwriters require a risk assessment certificate that is generated exclusively by an algorithm developed by your grandmother's R&D team. Without that certificate, the ships are uninsured. If they leave the dock uninsured, they are breaking international law. Who owns the algorithm? I do, I whispered. Precisely. Agatha sat back, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Marcus has the body, you have the oxygen. He can twitch and thrash all he wants. But if you decide to close the valve, he suffocates. He cannot move a single container, load a single crate, or sail a single nautical mile without a license agreement from you. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the page. Tucked into the sleeve of the binder was a smaller envelope. It was cream-colored stationery, sealed with wax. She wanted you to read this in private, Agatha said, her voice softening just a fraction. But we do not have time for privacy. Read it. I broke the seal. The scent of lavender and old paper wafted up. Grandma's scent. The handwriting was spidery but forceful. The ink pressed hard into the paper. My dearest Darlene, if you are reading this, then the sharks have circled, and they have left you with nothing but a rusted box. Good. Hunger sharpens the mind. I could have left you money. Money is easy. Money makes people soft, stupid, and cruel. Look at your uncle. Look at your cousin. They have never earned a dime they did not inherit or steal. I did not want that for you. I have watched you. Darlene, I have watched you take broken, forgotten things, and make them whole again. You have the one thing this family lacks: vision. You see the value in what others discard. So, I am not giving you a fortune to spend. I am giving you a hammer. You can use it to smash them into the ground, to punish them for their greed, or you can use it to build something new on the ashes of their failure. The choice is yours. But know this: the hammer is heavy. Do not swing it until you are ready to strike. Love, Grandma. I ran my thumb over the signature. I am giving you a hammer. She knew, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She knew exactly how they would treat me. Eleanor was a realist, Agatha said. Now, the question is, do we swing the hammer today? I can file a cease and desist order tomorrow morning. I can ground their entire fleet by noon. It would be a bloodbath. Their stock would drop to zero in 48 hours. I looked up at the wall of monitors. I thought about Marcus's smug face as he offered me cab fare. I thought about Pierce laughing at the tackle box. The temptation to burn them down instantly was a hot, bright flare in my chest. But then I looked at the minnow lure sitting on the desk. The one with the hidden coordinates. Patience. The big fish waits. No, I said. Not yet. Agatha raised an eyebrow. Oh? If we strike now, they will play the victim, I said, my mind racing, calculating the angles just as I would when piecing together a shattered mosaic. Marcus will claim it is a clerical error. He will blame the lawyers. He will try to settle. I do not want a settlement. I want a surrender. Go on, Agatha said, a small smile playing on her lips. We let them sail, I said. We let them operate. We let Marcus think he is the king of the world. We wait until he tries to sell the company to the Shanghai Consortium. We wait until he has signed the preliminary agreements and leveraged himself to the hilt. And then? Then we inform the buyers that the technology they are purchasing does not belong to Sterling Maritime. I said, we let the deal collapse. The penalties for breaking the contract will bankrupt Marcus personally. He won't just lose the company. He will lose the $50 million he just inherited. Agatha clapped her hands together once, a sharp, cracking sound. Brilliant, she said. Vicious. I love it. But I need protection, I added. If they find out I own Deep Lake before the trap is sprung, they will come for me, physically or legally. Way ahead of you, Agatha said. She pulled another document from her briefcase. This is a blind trust structure. We call it the Iron Curtain. Deep Lake Holdings will be owned by a trust. which is owned by a shell corporation in Zurich, which is managed by a law firm in Singapore. Your name appears nowhere. I will be the face of the trust. Any communication to Sterling Maritime will come from my office, citing anonymous client interests. You will be a ghost. Do it, I said. Consider it done, Agatha said, uncapping a fountain pen. Now, shall we see what the mice are doing in the maze? She nodded to Sully. He typed a command into the console. One of the large central monitors flickered and changed. It was no longer a map. It was a live video feed. Grandma had cameras installed in the executive boardroom 5 years ago, Sully explained. Audio and video. She said she liked to replay the meetings to see who was lying. The image was crisp, high definition. It showed the familiar mahogany table at the Sterling headquarters. Marcus and Pierce were there, and they were not celebrating. Marcus was pacing the length of the room, his suit jacket discarded on a chair, his tie loosened. He was shouting into a phone. "What do you mean the file is empty?" Marcus yelled. "Check the backups. The server cannot just be blank." He slammed the phone down and turned to Pierce, who was sitting at the table with a laptop open, looking pale. "Well," Marcus barked, "did you find the patent numbers for the hydrogen injectors?" "They are gone, Dad," Pierce said, his voice trembling. "I have searched the entire database. The entry for Project Greenline is there, but the folder is empty. It says, asset transferred, but it doesn't say where." "Transferred?" Marcus roared. "Transferred by whom? Eleanor was bedridden for a month." "The log says the transfer was authorized 6 months ago," Pierce said. "Dad, it's not just the engines, the logistics software, the client lists, the route algorithms. It is all gone. We have the ships, but we don't have the codes to run the automated systems." Marcus braced his hands on the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "She sold them. The old witch sold them behind my back. She stripped the company before she died just to spite me." "But where is the money?" Pierce asked. "If she sold them, there should be hundreds of millions of dollars in the accounts. Vance said the liquid cash was $50 million. That is nothing compared to what this IP is worth." "Maybe she gave it to charity," Marcus spat. "Maybe she burned it. I don't know. But we have a meeting with the Chinese buyers in 3 days. If we cannot show them we own the IP. The deal is dead. They are buying the tech, not the rust buckets." Pierce sat back, chewing on his thumbnail. His eyes were darting around the room, manic and fearful. Then, he stopped. "Dad," Pierce said slowly, "the will. What about it?" "The tackle box," Pierce said. Marcus stared at him. "Are you insane? We are talking about billion-dollar assets, and you are talking about fishing lures?" "Think about it," Pierce insisted. Standing up, Vance was weird about it, everything contained within it. And Darlene, she didn't cry, she didn't beg, she just took it. It was a box of junk. Pierce? Was it? Pierce walked around the table. "Grandma never did anything without a reason. You said it yourself. What if the sale documents were in that box? What if the access codes were in that box?" Marcus went silent. The color drained from his face, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. "She is a restoration specialist," Pierce continued, his voice rising. "She fixes old things. She finds things people miss. Dad, we let her walk out of here with the keys to the castle because we thought it was a lunchbox." Marcus grabbed his phone again. "Get her on the line. Call her. Offer her anything. Double the 10,000. Offer her 100,000. "I tried," Pierce said. "She blocked me." Marcus threw the phone against the wall. It shattered. "Find her," Marcus hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't care what it takes. Hire a private investigator. Hire a breaker. Go to her apartment. If she has those codes, I want them back. Tonight." In the silence of the command center, Agatha, Sully, and I watched the screen. "They are coming for you," Agatha said calmly. "It seems the timeline has accelerated." "Let them come," I said. watching Pierce's terrified face on the screen. They are looking for a girl who fixes broken chairs. They have no idea they are walking into a shark tank. Sully cracked his knuckles. I will activate the perimeter defenses. No one gets within a mile of this warehouse without us knowing. Good, I said. Agatha, file the papers for the Blind Trust and draft a letter to the Shanghai Consortium. Don't send it yet. Just have it ready. I turned away from the screen, away from the image of my panic-stricken family. I looked at the tackle box sitting on the workbench, gleaming under the blue lights of the server room. They want the box? I said softly. I'll give them the box. But they are not going to like what jumps out of it. The transition from the sterile, humming power of the server room back to my drafty apartment felt like stepping out of a submarine and onto a battlefield. I had spent 2 days at the warehouse, sleeping on a cot, drinking Sully's motor oil coffee, and absorbing the staggering reality of my grandmother's empire. I had learned the codes. I had memorized the shipping routes. I had become, in the span of 48 hours, the invisible CEO of a global logistics network. But I had to go back. Sully had advised against it. Agatha had frowned, her fountain pen hovering disapprovingly over her notepad. But we needed them to believe that nothing had changed. If Darlene Wainwright disappeared, they would know I was plotting. If Darlene Wainwright went back to her studio to fix broken chairs and eat takeout noodles, they might just believe I was the naive, scrap-collecting failure they wanted me to be. So I went home. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was not the peaceful silence of solitude. It was the heavy watching silence of a forest where a predator has just stepped on a twig. I walked down the hallway of my building, my keys clutched in my hand like a weapon, the metal biting into my palm. I checked the shadows. I checked the corners. A black sedan with tinted windows had been idling across the street when I parked. It was probably nothing, in Chicago. A black sedan could be an Uber, a drug dealer, or a politician, but my skin prickled with a cold, electric current that told me it was none of those things. I locked my door. I engaged the deadbolt. I wedged a heavy chair under the handle. I went to my workbench. It was empty. The tackle box was gone. I had left it with Agatha, locked in a vault that required a thumbprint and a voice code to open. My apartment felt naked without it. I tried to work. I had a 19th century rocking chair that needed a spindle replaced. I picked up my tools, but my hands were shaking. I set them down. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was polite, rhythmic, and terrifying. I froze. I looked at the clock. It was 7 in the evening. I was not expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the face on the other side, but I recognized the expensive haircut and the fake, practiced smile instantly. Pierce, I took a deep breath. Play the part. I told myself, you are just the cousin who likes trash. I moved the chair. I undid the locks. I opened the door just enough to show my face, leaving the security chain attached. Pierce, I said, pitching my voice to sound surprised and slightly wary. What are you doing here? Darlene, he said. He held up both hands in a gesture of surrender. In his left hand, he held a bottle of wine. I recognized the label. It was a Chateau Margaux, a vintage that cost more than my car. Peace offering. Can I come in? I am working, I said, glancing back at my messy living room. Please, he said. He actually managed to look contrite. He lowered his head, scuffing his expensive Italian loafer against my doormat. Look, I was an ass at the reading. We all were. It has been a stressful week. Dad is well. You know Dad. He is intense. But we are family. I just wanted to apologize. He looked up, offering a boyish, charming grin that had probably gotten him out of a dozen DUIs. For the wine? He asked. Wiggling the bottle, I hesitated. If I refused, he would know I was on guard. If I let him in, I was letting a viper into my nest. But I needed to know what he wanted. Fine, I said. I unhooked the chain and opened the door. Pierce stepped in, bringing the smell of cold air and expensive cologne with him. He looked around my apartment. his eyes scanning the room with a hunger that he tried to disguise as curiosity. He looked at the shelves of solvents. He looked at the half-finished rocking chair. He looked, specifically and intently, at the empty spot on the workbench where the tackle box had been. "Cozy," he said. "Bohemian." "It is a workspace," I said, walking to the kitchen to get 2 glasses. They were mismatched and cheap. I hoped the contrast with the $1,000 wine would annoy him. He poured the wine. The liquid was dark ruby red. He handed me a glass. "To Grandma," he said, raising his glass. "To Grandma." I repeated. I took a sip. It was excellent. It tasted like blood and money. Pierce wandered around the room, touching things. He picked up a chisel. He ran a finger along a shelf. "You know," he said casually, his back to me, "Dad is really broken up about the will. Not the money, the sentiment. He feels like he failed her." I almost laughed out loud. Marcus Sterling feeling sentimental was like a shark feeling guilty about eating a seal. "Is that so?" I asked. "Yeah. He has been talking about that tackle box non-stop," Pierce said. He turned to face me, leaning against my workbench. "He remembers her using it. He thinks having it in his office would help him feel close to her. Closure, you know?" Here it came, the hook. "I thought he said it was scrap metal," I said innocently. Pierce chuckled, a low, smooth sound. "Oh, he was just angry in the moment. Grief makes us say crazy things. Look, Darlene, I know it is technically yours, but honestly, what are you going to do with it? It is just taking up space. Dad authorized me to offer you well, a token of appreciation. If you give him the box..." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He tossed it on the table. It landed with a soft slap. $20,000, Pierce said. "Cash, right now, just for a rusty old box." He watched me. His eyes were laser-focused on my face, looking for a flicker of greed, a flicker of hesitation. I set my wine glass down. I needed to sell this performance. "20,000?" I asked, widening my eyes. "For the box?" "And the contents," Pierce added quickly. "Just as it was. Dad wants the whole set, lures and all." I bit my lip. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at Pierce. "I don't know. Pierce," I stammered. "I mean, it is a lot of money, but I was so angry yesterday." "Angry?" Pierce asked, stepping closer. "What did you do, Darlene?" "I threw it in storage," I lied. "Or maybe I left it in the trunk of my car. I was just so mad at you guys. I didn't want to look at it." Pierce's jaw tightened. "So it is not here?" "No," I said. "It's around somewhere. I think, unless I put it out with the recycling. I can't remember." A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed Pierce's face. It was beautiful. He thought the keys to the empire might be sitting in a recycling bin in an alleyway. "You have to find it," he said, his voice losing its smooth charm. It was sharp now, urgent. "Darlene, you need to find that box. Tonight. I will look for it tomorrow," I said, yawning fake fatigue. "I am tired. Pierce, thanks for the wine." He stared at me. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. I saw the violence in his eyes, the entitlement of a man who has never been told wait in his entire life. He took a step toward me. I held my ground, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then, he stopped. He forced the smile back onto his face. It looked like a crack in a porcelain mask. "Okay," he said. "Okay, look for it, but call me the second you find it, day or night. Seriously, Darlene, don't lose that box." He chugged the rest of his wine in one gulp and set the glass down hard on the table. "I will see myself out," when the door clicked shut behind him. I locked it. Then I chained it. Then I dragged the chair back. I did not drink the rest of the wine. I poured it down the sink. It looked too much like a warning. I did not sleep that night. I turned off all the lights and sat in the corner of my bedroom, clutching my phone, listening to the building settle. At 2 a.m, the settling sounds changed. There was a scratch at the front door, not a knock, a metal scratch. I watched the doorknob. It turned, slowly, silently. The lock clicked. My stomach dropped. These were not amateurs. I had a deadbolt that I had installed myself. A high-security cylinder that should have taken 10 minutes to pick. They bypassed it in 10 seconds. The door pushed open. It hit the chain. A normal burglar would have kicked it. These men did not. I heard a soft snip, and the chain fell away. They had cut through hardened steel like it was ribbon. I shrank back into the shadows of the bedroom closet, peering through the slats of the door. I had dialed 911 on my phone, but my thumb hovered over the call button. If I called the police, Marcus would know I was scared. If I called the police, this became a public record. Two shapes moved into the living room. They wore black tactical gear and night vision goggles. They moved with fluid, military precision. They did not look at the TV. They did not look at my laptop sitting on the coffee table. They went straight to the workbench. One of them swept the tools onto the floor with a crash that sounded like a bomb going off in the silence. They began to tear the room apart. They pulled drawers out and dumped them. They ripped the cushions off the sofa. They were looking for a box, a specific size, a specific shape. "Clear," one of them whispered. His voice was distorted, likely by a throat mic. "Check the bedroom," the other one said. I stopped breathing. I pressed my hand over my mouth. They moved toward the hallway. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing to scream, preparing to fight, clutching a heavy brass candlestick I had grabbed from the shelf. "Abort," a voice crackled from a radio on the first man's shoulder. "Perimeter breach. Police patrol turning the corner." The men froze. "Go," the leader whispered. They turned and vanished. No running, no panic, just a swift, silent exit. I waited 5 minutes, then 10, then I crawled out of the closet. My living room was a disaster zone. It looked like a hurricane had spawned in the center of the room. My tools were scattered. My carefully organized jars of pigments were smashed, bleeding red and blue stains into the carpet. They had ripped the backing off the rocking chair. They had destroyed my sanctuary. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. The street was empty. There was no police patrol. It was a lie. They had not been scared off. They had left because they realized the box wasn't there, or maybe they wanted to leave a message. "We can get in. You are not safe." My phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I answered. I did not speak. There was silence on the other end. No breathing, just the dead, static hiss of an open line. It lasted for 10 seconds. Then the line went dead. Gaslighting. They wanted me paranoid. They wanted me to feel like I was going crazy. Hearing things, seeing things. I grabbed my go bag. I had packed it before Pierce arrived. A change of clothes, my laptop, and the folio Agatha had given me. I could not stay here. I went out the fire escape. Climbing down the rusted iron ladder into the alleyway, the snow was falling again, covering the tracks of the men who had violated my home. I hailed a taxi 3 blocks away. "The Drake Hotel," I told the driver. Agatha had booked a suite there under a shell company name. It had 24-hour security, cameras in the hallways that actually worked, and a doorman who used to be a linebacker. As the taxi slid through the snowy streets, I checked my email on my phone. A new message had arrived at 3 a.m. From Marcus Sterling, Executive Office. To Darlene Wainwright. Subject: Urgent. Finalizing estate paperwork. Dear Darlene, I hope you are resting well. Arthur Vance informed me this evening that there was a clerical oversight in the initial will reading. There is a supplemental codicil regarding the distribution of personal effects that requires your signature immediately to close the probate process. Please come to the Sterling headquarters tomorrow at 10 in the morning. It is a minor formality, just a few signatures, and then we can all move on. We can also discuss buying that old box from you if you have found it. I would hate for legal complications to delay the settlement of the estate. Best, Uncle Marcus. I stared at the screen. Legal complications. It was a threat wrapped in corporate speak. He was inviting me into the lion's den. He wanted me in the building, in a room he controlled, surrounded by his lawyers and his security. He thought I was a scared little girl who had just had her apartment ransacked. He thought I would come running to him for safety, ready to sign anything to make the nightmare stop. He did not know that the nightmare was reciprocal. I typed a reply as the taxi pulled up to the gilded awning of the hotel. To Marcus Sterling. Subject: urgent. I will be there. I did not sign it. I paid the driver and walked into the warmth of the lobby. I was not fleeing anymore. I was repositioning. They had made their move. They had invaded my territory. Tomorrow, I would invade theirs, and I would not be bringing a fishing rod. I would be bringing the hammer. The Sterling estate in Lake Forest was not a home. It was a monument to ego constructed in limestone and slate. I drove my rental car up the winding, heated driveway, flanked by century-old oaks that looked like skeletal sentinels in the winter gray. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling Georgian revival mansion that had hosted senators, movie stars, and captains of industry. Today, however, it looked like a mausoleum. The windows were dark, save for the ground floor drawing room, where a faint orange glow flickered against the heavy velvet drapes. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. I wore a simple navy blazer and slacks. Professional, unassuming, but beneath the lapel of my jacket, pinned securely to the lining, was a high-fidelity digital recorder the size of a stick of gum. On my left wrist, my smartwatch was synced to a priority alert channel. I was walking into the belly of the beast, and I was doing it alone. Agatha had wanted to send a lawyer with me, but I refused. If I brought a lawyer, they would clam up. I needed them to speak freely. I needed them to think I was vulnerable. I parked the car and walked to the massive oak double doors. Before I could reach for the brass knocker, the door swung open. It was not a servant. It was Pierce. He was not wearing the casual designer wear from my apartment visit. He was in a suit, tie loosened, looking like a man who had not slept in 48 hours. His eyes were red-rimmed. "You came," he said, his voice flat. "Uncle Marcus sent an email," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "He said it was urgent paperwork." Pierce stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Library? They are waiting." I walked through the foyer. The house smelled of lemon polish and old money, a scent I associated with holidays spent sitting at the children's table while the adults discussed mergers in the other room. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The library was a cavernous room lined with books that no one in the family had ever read. A fire roared in the oversized hearth, but it did little to chase away the chill in the air. Uncle Marcus sat in a leather wingback chair near the fire, swirling a glass of amber liquid. Aunt Rosalind stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. When I entered, the atmosphere shifted instantly. It was a physical drop in pressure. "Darlene," Rosalind said, turning with a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a brittle, practiced expression. She walked over and made a motion to hug me, but stopped just short, settling for a light touch on my arm. "Thank you for coming. We were so worried about you after the break-in." "It was terrifying," I said, playing my part. "I had to stay in a hotel." "Terrible," Rosalind sighed, guiding me to a chair opposite Marcus. "This city is going to the dogs. Simply terrible. Can I get you anything? Tea? Water?" "No, thank you," I said. I sat down, keeping my back straight, my hands folded in my lap, so I could easily tap the watch if needed. Marcus did not get up. He stared at the fire for a long moment before turning his gaze to me. He looked aged. The confident CEO from the boardroom was gone, replaced by a man looking at the edge of a cliff. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Marcus said, his voice raspy. "We are family. We should be honest with each other." "Honesty would be a nice change," I said. Marcus placed his glass on the side table with a sharp clack. "We know, Darlene," he said. I did not blink. "Know what?" "Deep Lake Holdings," Marcus said. The name hung in the air like smoke. "We know it exists. We know Eleanor moved the IP. And we know you are the signatory." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "My contacts at the Cayman Bank were very helpful. It seems a junior compliance officer was willing to share some account structures for a reasonable fee. We know everything: the patents, the software, the real estate titles. She stripped us clean." "She protected the assets," I corrected him gently. "She stole them!" Rosalind snapped, her mask of kindness slipping. "Those assets belong to the family, to the company. She had no right to hide them away in some shell company controlled by a restoration specialist," I finished for her. Marcus held up a hand to silence his wife. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a gold pen and scribbled quickly. He tore the check out and slid it across the low table toward me. I looked at it. It was a cashier's check, drawn on his personal account. $1 million. "There," Marcus said, leaning back. "That is for you. $1 million, tax-free, essentially, since we will frame it as a gift." "What is this for?" I asked. Looking at the number, it was a fortune to most people. To me, a week ago, it would have been life-changing. Now, knowing what Deep Lake was worth, it was an insult. It was pocket change. "It is a buyout," Marcus said smoothly. "Look, Darlene, we know you didn't ask for this. Eleanor was declining in her final years. She became paranoid. She used you. She set up this structure to punish me because I wanted to modernize the fleet. She made you a placeholder." He offered a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. "You are not a CEO. Darlene, you are an artist. You fix chairs. You paint dolls. You don't know how to manage international logistics algorithms. If the Shanghai Consortium finds out a hobbyist is holding the IP, they will walk. The company will collapse. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Do you want that on your conscience?" Gaslighting. He was trying to make me feel small, incompetent, and guilty all at once. "Sign the transfer documents," Marcus said, gesturing to a stack of papers on the desk behind him. "Transfer Deep Lake back to Sterling Maritime. Take the $1 million. Go to Paris. Open a gallery. Live your life. Let the adults handle the business." I looked at the check again. Then I looked at Marcus. "Grandma was not declining," I said softly. "She was the sharpest person in this room. And she didn't make me a placeholder. She made me the owner." Marcus's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "I cannot sign this," I said, pushing the check back across the table. "Grandma left Deep Lake to me for a reason. She wanted to ensure the company wasn't sold off for parts. She wanted it to survive. If I give it back to you, you will sell it to Shanghai by Friday." "I am the CEO!" Marcus roared, the facade shattering completely. He slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. "I decide what happens to this company, not some ungrateful little brat who thinks she is special because she inherited a box of fishing lures." "I am not signing," I said, standing up. "I need time to think. I need to review the operations." "You are not walking out of here," Rosalind hissed. She looked demonic in the firelight. "You steal our inheritance and think you can just walk away?" "Sit down," Marcus commanded. His voice was cold steel now. "You think this is a negotiation? It is not. You are committing fraud. Darlene, undue influence on a vulnerable senior, embezzlement of corporate assets. If you do not sign those papers right now, I will have my legal team bury you. I will tie you up in court for 20 years. I will drain every penny you have. You will rot in a jail cell for elder abuse." "Grandma was medically cleared," I said, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "I have the videos. I have the doctor's notes. You can't scare me with lawsuits, Marcus." "Then maybe we scare you with something else," Marcus said. He nodded to Pierce, who had been standing by the door, moved. He did not walk. He stalked. He was a big man, 6'2", built from years of rowing crew and expensive personal trainers. He stepped between me and the exit. "Sign the papers, Darlene," Pierce said. He was not smiling. He was looming. "Just sign them. Don't make this ugly. Get out of my way. Pierce, I said. No, he said, crossing his arms. You are not leaving with our money. You are going to sit down, pick up that pen, and sign, or I'm going to make you sit down. He took a step toward me. The physical threat was palpable. This was not a business meeting anymore. It was a kidnapping. Are you going to hit me, Pierce? I asked, my hand moving behind my back to my wrist. In your father's library? That is a felony. Who is going to tell? Pierce sneered. It's just family here. You tripped. You fell. You hit your head. Clumsy Darlene. Marcus watched from his chair, saying nothing. He was condoning this. He was letting his son be the enforcer. This was the true face of the Sterling family. Brute force hidden behind velvet curtains. I pressed the side button on my watch. 3 times, rapidly. Last chance, Pierce said, reaching out to grab my shoulder. His grip was hard, painful. He dug his fingers into my trapezius muscle. Sit. Down. Crash. The front doors of the mansion did not open. They were kicked in. The sound reverberated through the house like a gunshot. What the hell? Marcus jumped up. Heavy footsteps thundered across the marble foyer. Fast. Professional. 3 men burst into the library. They were not wearing police uniforms. They were wearing dark charcoal suits, earpieces, and they moved with the terrifying efficiency of ex-special forces. Step away from Ms. Wainwright, the lead man shouted. He did not draw a weapon, but his stance made it clear he didn't need one. Pierce froze. He looked at the men, then back at me, his hand still gripping my shoulder. I said step away, the guard barked, advancing. Pierce let go of me like I was on fire and stumbled back, his face draining of all color. I was just... The guards formed a protective wedge around me. The leader, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, looked at me. Ms. Wainwright, are you injured? I am fine, I said, rubbing my shoulder. Just ready to leave. Marcus was sputtering, his face purple with rage and confusion. Who are you? This is private property. Get out of my house. We are private security contracted by the Deep Lake Trust, the guard replied calmly. We received a distress signal. If you wish to press charges for trespassing, you can speak to our legal counsel, but I suggest you don't, considering we just witnessed an assault. Marcus looked at the guards, then at me. He realized the game had changed. He wasn't dealing with his niece anymore. He was dealing with a rival power. You, Marcus whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You set us up. You wiretapped us. I reached into my lapel and unpinned the recorder. I held it up so the red recording light was visible. Illinois is a 2-party consent state for audio recording, I said calmly, unless there is a reasonable expectation that a crime is being committed. Extortion and unlawful imprisonment are crimes. Marcus, I pocketed the device. I tried to be respectful, I said, looking at the 3 of them. Marcus, the defeated king, Rosalind, the venomous snake, and Pierce, the cowardly bully. I tried to give you a chance to prove Grandma wrong, to prove that you cared about something other than the bank account. I turned to walk out, the guards parting to let me through. You are going to regret this, Marcus screamed after me. You are a nobody. You are a glorified garbage collector. I stopped at the doorway. I turned back one last time. The firelight cast long, distorted shadows of my family against the walls. You are right, Uncle Marcus, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am a restorer. I spend my life fixing broken things. I sand down the rot. I glue the cracks. I polish the tarnish. I looked him dead in the eye. But I have looked at this family. I have looked at what you have become, and I have realized something. What? Marcus spat. This family is too broken to fix. I said. I turned and walked out of the library, flanked by my iron shield, leaving them alone in the cold, expensive silence of their impending ruin. The morning sun did not bring light. It brought an avalanche. I woke up in the safety of the hotel suite. the thread count of the sheets offering a false sense of security, only to find that my world had been incinerated while I slept. I turned on my phone, and it vibrated so violently with incoming notifications that it nearly buzzed off the nightstand. I opened the news app, and there, staring back at me, was a photo of myself. It was a terrible photo, taken years ago at a family barbecue I hadn't wanted to attend. I looked sullen, unkempt, and angry. The headline was not subtle. The Black Sheep's Heist: How the Sterling Granddaughter Manipulated a Dying Billionaire. I felt the blood drain from my face. I scrolled down. It was a masterclass in character assassination. The article, written by a journalist known for his close ties to the city's corporate elite, painted a picture of me that was so distorted it was almost unrecognizable. I was described as a failed artist and a recluse who had preyed on Eleanor Sterling's dementia in her final months. It claimed I had isolated her from her loving family, twisted her mind against her devoted son Marcus, and coerced her into signing over assets she didn't understand. It was a lie, a meticulously crafted, expensive lie. I turned on the television. The local news was running a segment. There was a clip of Marcus, standing on the steps of the Sterling headquarters, looking solemn and heartbroken. "We are devastated," Marcus said to the cameras, dabbing his eye with a handkerchief. "Not about the money. We don't care about the money. We care about the fact that my mother, a woman of dignity, was taken advantage of in her final days. We just want to restore her true legacy." I threw the remote against the wall. It shattered. The phone rang. It was not a reporter. It was Dr. Aris, the director of the Museum of Contemporary History. My boss. "Darlene." His voice was tight, strained. "I know. Dr. Aris," I said, my hand shaking. "It is all lies. Marcus is making it up because I wouldn't let him bully me." "Darlene, listen," he interrupted. "I had a call this morning, from the board of directors." My stomach dropped. "And?" "Mrs. Rosalind Sterling is on the board of 3 of our major donor foundations," he said. "She made it very clear that funding for the entire restoration wing, your salary, your equipment, the upcoming exhibition, is contingent on the museum maintaining ethical standards. I have been working there for 6 years, I said, my voice rising. "You know my ethics. You know me." "I do." "Doctor," Aris said, and I could hear the shame in his voice. "But I have 30 other employees to think about. If the funding gets pulled, we all go under." "I am so sorry. Darlene, we have to terminate your contract, effective immediately." The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room pressing in on me. I had just lost the one thing that defined me outside of my last name. My work, my sanctuary. They hadn't just attacked my reputation. They had nuked my identity. I needed coffee. I needed to get out of this room. I threw on a coat, pulled a baseball cap low over my eyes, and went down to the hotel cafe. I ordered a black coffee and a bagel. I tapped my debit card on the reader. Beep. Declined. I frowned. "Try it again, please." Beep. Declined. "Do you have another card?" the barista asked. A line forming behind me. I pulled out my credit card. Declined. I stood there, humiliated, while the people in line shifted impatiently. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. I left the food on the counter and walked away, my hands trembling in my pockets. I pulled up my banking app, account frozen. "Contact your financial institution." I dialed the bank. After 10 minutes on hold, a customer service representative told me in a robotic voice that my accounts had been flagged for suspicious activity related to pending litigation regarding fraud. They were starving me out. It was a siege. Marcus knew he couldn't get into the server room, so he was burning down the village around it. He wanted me broke, jobless, and hated by the entire city. He wanted me to crawl back to him and beg for that $1 million check. I took a taxi to the warehouse, paying with the crumpled $20 bill I found in my coat pocket, the last cash I had to my name. when I walked into the command center. I looked like a ghost. Agatha was there, pacing while on the phone, shouting at someone in legal jargon. Sully was at the monitors, his face grim. I collapsed into a chair. "They fired me," I whispered. "And they froze my money." Agatha hung up the phone and looked at me. "I know. We are filing an injunction to unfreeze the assets, but the courts are slow, and Marcus has friends in the district attorney's office. They are stalling." "I can't do this," I said, putting my head in my hands. "Agatha, I am a restorer. I fix things. I don't fight wars. Look at the news. Everyone hates me. They think I am a monster who abused her grandmother." I felt a tear slip through my fingers. "Maybe I should just sign. Maybe I should just give it back. I can't live like this. I can't fight the whole world." The room went silent. The hum of the servers seemed to get louder. "Sully," Agatha said, her voice soft but commanding. "Play the tape." "Ms. Wainwright," Sully started. "Play it." Sully typed a command. The main screen, which had been showing the falling stock prices of Sterling Maritime, flickered and changed. It was a video file. The timestamp was from 6 months ago. Grandma Eleanor was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window at the lake house. She looked frail, her breathing was labored, and her hands were thin, translucent like parchment paper, but her eyes, those steel-gray eyes, were blazing. She looked directly into the camera lens. "Hello, Darlene," she said. Hearing her voice, strong and real, broke something inside me. I looked up, wiping my eyes. "If you are watching this," Grandma continued, "then Marcus has gone nuclear. I assume he has gone to the press? Yes. He always liked to play the victim in public. I assume Rosalind has cut your social ties? She always was petty." She paused, taking a sip of water. "You are feeling alone right now," she said. "You are feeling like a small boat in a hurricane. You are thinking about quitting. You are thinking that the money isn't worth the pain." It was as if she was in the room with me. She knew them. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. "Listen to me, Darlene," she said, leaning forward. "When a predator screams, it is not because he is winning. It is because he is hurt. If they are attacking you this hard, if they are throwing every lie they can invent at you, it means they are terrified. They are terrified of what you hold in your hands." She pointed a finger at the camera. "They think power comes from noise. They think power comes from what people say about you. They are wrong. Power comes from the truth. And the truth is, my son is a fraud. He has built a house of cards on a foundation of rot. I did not give you the company to make you rich. I gave it to you because you are the only one with the courage to strike the match." She smiled, a small, mischievous smile that I remembered from my childhood fishing trips. "Don't let them catch you. Be the big fish in the deep. Wait, and when they are done screaming, eat them." The screen went black. I sat there for a long time. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was charged. The despair that had been choking me 5 minutes ago began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They weren't attacking me because I was weak. They were attacking me because I was the only thing standing between them and total destruction. They were desperate. I stood up. I wiped my face. I looked at Agatha. "I am not signing," I said. Agatha smiled, a shark-like grin that showed all her teeth. "Good. But I am done playing defense," I said. "I am done hiding in this warehouse waiting for their next hit. Grandma said Marcus is a fraud. She said the house is built on rot." I turned to Sully. "You said you had the dirt, the insurance policy. What is in it?" Sully stood up and walked to the safe in the corner. He pulled out a hard drive. He plugged it into the main console. "Marcus has been cutting costs to pump up the quarterly profits for 5 years, Sully explained as files began to populate the screen. He wanted the company to look more valuable for the sale to the Chinese. He opened a folder labeled Emissions. "These are the official reports Sterling Maritime submitted to the EPA and the International Maritime Organization," Sully said, pointing to a document. They certify that all 24 ships in the fleet are equipped with Type 4 sulfur scrubbers to meet the new clean air standards. And? I asked. Sully opened a second window. It was a series of internal emails between Marcus and the Chief of Engineering. Subject: Scrubber Retrofit. From Marcus Sterling. To Chief Engineer, cancel the order for the scrubbers. We don't have the cash flow. Just install the bypass valves and fudge the sensor data. I will handle the inspectors. My jaw dropped. He is faking the emissions data? That is a federal crime. It gets worse, Sully said grimly. He opened another folder. Maintenance logs. The Sterling Titan, the flagship of the fleet. The hull integrity sensors were tripping alarms 8 months ago. The engineers recommended dry docking for immediate repairs. Marcus overrode them. He kept the ship in rotation. It is crossing the Atlantic right now with a structural fracture that could split the ship in half in a heavy storm. I looked at the screen. I saw the crew manifests. Hundreds of sailors. Men and women working on floating time bombs because my uncle wanted to save a few $1,000,000 to buy another vacation home. This wasn't just business anymore. This wasn't just about a will or a tackle box. This was about lives. Marcus was not just a greedy businessman. He was a criminal. He was willing to risk an environmental catastrophe and the lives of his crew to line his pockets. This destroys him, I said softly. If this gets out, he goes to prison. For a very long time, Agatha agreed. But we have to be careful. If we leak this to the press, he might spin it. He might blame a subordinate. He is good at that. No leaks, I said. No more games with the media. I am done trying to win the popularity contest. I looked at the map on the screen. The Sterling Titan was a blinking red dot in the middle of the ocean. Agatha, I said, prepare a filing, not a defense, a complaint. You want to sue him? Agatha asked. No, I said. I want to invoke the Black Swan Clause, but I want to do it in open court. I want to drag him in front of a judge and force him to answer for this under oath. Darlene, Agatha warned, once we file this, there is no going back. It becomes public record. The government will get involved. The FBI. The EPA. It will be a war. He started the war when he sent men to my house, I said. He started the war when he got me fired. He thinks I am a girl who paints dolls? Fine. I will show him what happens when you try to paint over rust without fixing the metal underneath. I walked over to the main console and placed my hand on the desk, right next to the hard drive that contained the end of the Sterling Empire. He called me a fraud, I said, my voice steady. He called me a thief. Tomorrow, I am going to show the world who the real thief is. I looked at Sully. Do we have enough money in the operational account to hire a forensic accounting firm? I want every single one of these documents verified and notarized by a third party. We have plenty, Sully said. Do it, I ordered. And Agatha, call the district attorney. Tell him we have a whistleblower package regarding Sterling Maritime. Tell him we are ready to make a deal. Agatha's eyes widened. You are bypassing civil court? You are going straight to criminal? I am not interested in his money anymore, I said, looking at the photo of my grandmother on the wall. I am interested in his freedom. I turned back to the screen, where the headlines were still scrolling, calling me a gold digger. Let them talk. Let them write their hit pieces. They were writing the obituary for the wrong person. Get some sleep, you two, I said. We have a court date to catch. The legal assault began not with a bang, but with a courier in a cheap windbreaker knocking on the reinforced steel door of the warehouse at 7 a.m. He handed Sully a box. It was a banker's box, heavy and taped shut, with the logo of Harland and Associates stamped on the side in aggressive crimson ink. I sat at the command desk, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and cut the tape. Inside were 3,000 pages of legal filings. Marcus had pulled the trigger. The header on the primary document was bold and capitalized. Marcus Sterling versus Darlene Wainwright and the Deep Lake Trust. The cause of action was listed as lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. I read the opening summary. It was a work of fiction that would have made a novelist jealous. It claimed that during the last 6 months of her life, Eleanor Sterling had been suffering from advanced vascular dementia, characterized by paranoia and confusion. It alleged that I, Darlene Wainwright, had used my position as her occasional caretaker to isolate her from her devoted son and coerce her into transferring the core assets of the company into a shell entity she did not understand. "He is claiming she was insane," I said, my voice quiet in the humming room. "He is dragging his own mother's memory through the mud just to get the patents back." Agatha Thorne sat across from me, reading her own copy of the filing. She did not look angry. She looked like a predator watching a wounded gazelle limp into tall grass. "He has walked right into it," Agatha said, flipping a page. Eleanor predicted this. She knew Marcus's ego would not let him accept that she simply didn't trust him. He has to believe she was crazy, because the alternative, that she saw him clearly and rejected him, is too painful for a narcissist to bear. "Who is Harland?" I asked, pointing to the lawyer's name on the summons. "Richard Harland," Agatha said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He is a pit bull in an expensive suit. He is loud, he is aggressive, and he loves the cameras. He wins cases by bullying the opposition into settlement. He thinks he is going to bury us in paperwork until we suffocate." She looked up at me, her blue eyes gleaming. "He has no idea that we have been holding our breath for years." For the next 3 days, we maintained absolute radio silence. This was the hardest part. Outside the warehouse walls, the media storm was reaching a fever pitch. Richard Harland was on every local news channel, giving interviews on the courthouse steps. He called me a shadowy figure and a grifter. He painted Marcus as the grieving son trying to protect his family's legacy from a thief. My phone blew up with requests for comment. Reporters were camping out in the lobby of my apartment building, harassing my neighbors. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to get on TV and cry, or scream, or deny it. They wanted fuel for the fire. I gave them nothing. "Let them talk," I told Sully when he clenched his fists at a particularly nasty segment on the morning news. "Every word they say now is just another shovel of dirt they are digging out of their own grave." While they made noise, we made paper. Agatha and I worked 18 hours a day. We were not preparing a defense. A defense implies you are trying to protect yourself. We were preparing a counter-assault. We took the evidence Sully had compiled, the falsified emissions reports, the ignored safety warnings, the bribery logs, and we wove them into a legal narrative that was devastating in its precision. We filed our response on a Friday afternoon, 5 minutes before the court clerk's office closed. It was not a simple motion to dismiss. It was a countersuit alleging corporate malfeasance, fraud, and reckless endangerment. The moment the stamp hit the paper, the dynamic shifted. We weren't just the defendants anymore, we were the prosecutors. But the real turning point happened on Saturday night. I was in the archives section of the warehouse, cross-referencing the founding bylaws of Deep Lake Holdings. I had read them before, skimming through the legalese, but tonight I was looking for something specific. I had a nagging feeling, a memory of something Grandma had said on the boat years ago. When you set a trap for a bear, Darlene, make sure he cannot chew his leg off to get away. Sully walked in. He looked tired, his face drawn. He was holding a small digital recorder. "You need to hear this," he said. "What is it?" "I had a visitor at the gate an hour ago," Sully said. "He stayed in his car. Didn't want the cameras to see his face. It was Pierce." I stiffened. "Pierce? What did he want?" "He wanted to make a donation," Sully said grimly. He pressed play on the recorder. The audio was grainy, mixed with the sound of wind and a car engine idling, but Pierce's voice was unmistakable. It was high-pitched, desperate, and fast. "Look, Sully, nobody has to know. You are just the night watchman. These old warehouses catch fire all the time. Faulty wiring, a heater left on. It happens." Sully's voice on the recording was calm, steady. "You are asking me to burn down the building. Pierce?" I am asking you to solve a problem, Pierce hissed. There is a server room in there. If that server room overheats and the data is lost, then there is no proof of ownership. The IP reverts to the parent company by default. $50,000, Sully, cash, in a gym bag, tonight. Just walk away for an hour, leave a cigarette burning. That is all it takes. The recording ended with the sound of a car door slamming and tires screeching away. I stared at the device. My hands were cold. He tried to bribe you to commit arson, I said. He tried to destroy the evidence. $50,000, Sully scoffed. He insults me. Eleanor paid for my daughter's medical school. I would not burn a match for that boy if he offered me the moon. We have him, I said. This is a felony. Attempted arson, tampering with evidence. We can have him arrested tonight. No, Agatha said, emerging from the shadows of the server racks. She had been listening. Not tonight. If we arrest him now, Harland will spin it. He will say Pierce was having a mental breakdown, that it has nothing to do with Marcus. He will distance the father from the son. She walked over and took the recorder from Sully. We keep this in our pocket, Agatha said. We save it for the courtroom. When Harland tries to paint them as the noble victims, we play this. It destroys their credibility instantly. I nodded. It was the right play. But my mind was still racing. Pierce was desperate enough to commit arson. Marcus was desperate enough to sue his own mother's estate. They were throwing everything they had at the wall to see what stuck. I turned back to the stack of documents on my desk, the bylaws of Deep Lake Holdings. There had to be something else. Grandma Eleanor was a chess master. She wouldn't just rely on me fighting them off. She would have built a fail-safe. I started reading again. Section 1, Section 2, Corporate Structure, Shareholder Rights. It was all standard boilerplate. Then I turned to page 42. Section 8, Subsection 4. It was a small paragraph, buried at the bottom of the page, titled The Non-Contestability Covenant. I read it, then I read it again. My heart slammed against my ribs. Agatha, I whispered. Come here. What did you find? She asked, adjusting her glasses as she leaned over my shoulder. Read this, I said, pointing to the clause. The Black Swan Clause. Agatha read it. For the first time since I had met her, the white shark looked stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, and she let out a breath that was half laugh, half gasp. My God, Agatha whispered. She really did think of everything. The clause was simple, brutal, and legally binding. It stated, in the event that any beneficiary of the primary estate of Eleanor Sterling initiates legal action to challenge, annul, or otherwise interfere with the independent operations of Deep Lake Holdings, said beneficiary shall be deemed in violation of the conditional terms of the primary will. Upon the filing of such legal action, all bequests, trusts, and assets granted to said beneficiary under the primary will shall be immediately forfeited and transferred to the Sterling Charitable Foundation. I looked at Agatha. Does this mean what I think it means? It means, Agatha said, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across her face, that the moment Marcus filed that lawsuit on Tuesday morning, he disinherited himself. I sat back, the magnitude of it washing over me. Grandma had set a trap that triggered the moment they attacked. By trying to grab the hidden assets of Deep Lake, Marcus had unknowingly violated the conditions of keeping the $50 million and the shipping company. He doesn't know, I said. He thinks Deep Lake is a separate entity. He doesn't know the bylaws are linked to the main will. Harlan didn't do his homework, Agatha said, gleeful. He saw a shell company and assumed it was standard corporate governance. He never requested the full articles of incorporation because Deep Lake is private. So, I said, looking at the document, we can end this right now. We can send this to the judge, and the case gets thrown out, and Marcus loses everything. Agatha shook her head. If we send it now, Harlan might try to withdraw the lawsuit. He might try to argue that since the case hasn't gone to trial, the violation isn't complete. He will try to weasel out of it. She looked at me, her eyes hard. "We have to let the trap snap shut completely. We have to let them walk into court. We have to let them present their opening arguments. We have to let them state, on the record, in front of a judge, that they are challenging the validity of Deep Lake." "We ambush them," I said. "We execute them," Agatha corrected. I looked at the document one last time. It was not just a legal clause. It was a posthumous checkmate. Grandma had known that Marcus's greed was his fatal flaw. She knew he wouldn't be content with the millions she gave him. She knew he would come for the rest, and she had ensured that the act of reaching for more would cost him everything he already had. "Okay," I said, closing the binder. "We keep it secret. Not a word to the press, not a whisper to Harland." "What about the hearing?" Agatha asked. "It is scheduled for Tuesday. Harland is going to turn it into a circus. He has subpoenaed you to testify." "I will be there," I said. I thought about the reporter calling me a thief. I thought about Pierce threatening me in the library. I thought about the men ransacking my apartment. "I want to see his face," I said. "I want to be standing 5 feet away from Marcus when he realizes he just sued himself into poverty." I stood up and walked to the window of the warehouse, looking out at the dark, frozen river. "They wanted a fight," I said to the reflection in the glass. "They wanted to drag me into the mud. They forgot that when you wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty. But the pig likes it. I am not going to wrestle." I turned back to Agatha and Sully. "I am going to drop a piano on them." The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. We organized the evidence. We prepped the recording of Pierce. We sealed the Black Swan document in a separate envelope. By Monday night, the tension in the warehouse was electric. We were ready. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, thinking about the tackle box. I thought about the rusty old lures. The biggest fish lies in the deep. Marcus was swimming in shallow water, making a lot of noise, splashing around, thinking he was the apex predator. He had no idea what was rising from the bottom to meet him. Tomorrow, the court of law would become a slaughterhouse, and for the first time in my life. I wasn't afraid of my family. I pitied them, because tomorrow they were going to learn the lesson Eleanor Sterling had tried to teach them for 40 years. Greed is not a strategy. It is a hook, and they had swallowed it whole. The Cook County Courthouse was a circus. That is not a metaphor. The steps were swarming with reporters, cameras, and onlookers who had read the hit pieces and wanted to catch a glimpse of the black sheep heist girl. When my town car pulled up, the flashes went off like a strobe light in a nightclub. I didn't shield my face. I wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, and I walked up those steps with my head high, ignoring the shouted questions. "Did you coerce her? Are you selling the patents? Do you hate your family?" Inside, courtroom 4B was packed to standing room only. The air was thick with body heat and the smell of wet wool. On the left side of the aisle sat the Sterling faction. Marcus looked impeccable in a navy pinstripe suit, his face a mask of solemn, grieving dignity. Rosalind was beside him, dabbing dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Pierce sat on the end, looking twitchy, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. On the right side sat Agatha Thorne and me. We had no entourage, no PR team, just 2 women and a stack of files. Judge Harold P. Vance, no relation to the estate lawyer, entered. He was an older man with a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics. He banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. "Case number 49,221, the bailiff announced. "Marcus Sterling versus Darlene Wainwright and the Deep Lake Trust, Richard Harland." Marcus's lawyer stood up. He was a man who seemed to be made entirely of teeth and hair gel. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish and approached the bench. "Your Honor," Harland began, his voice booming for the benefit of the press in the back row. "We are here today to right a terrible wrong. We are here to prove that the defendant, Ms. Wainwright, took advantage of a confused, dying woman to siphon off the core assets of a century-old family business. We are asking the court to invalidate the transfer of assets to Deep Lake Holdings on the grounds of non-compos mentis, that Eleanor Sterling was not of sound mind. He turned to point a finger at me. This is not just a legal matter, Your Honor. This is a tragedy. A grandmother manipulated by the very person sworn to care for her. Ms. Wainwright is not a businesswoman. She is a predator who saw an opportunity to steal a legacy she did not earn. Marcus nodded solemnly from his table. Looking like a man carrying the weight of the world, Judge Vance looked over his glasses. Mr. Harland, save the opening monologue for the jury. This is a preliminary hearing on the motion to dismiss and the countersuit. Do you have evidence of the deceased's mental state? We do, Your Honor, Harland said. We have affidavits from household staff stating that Mrs. Sterling was often confused and paranoid in her final months. Affidavits are hearsay, the judge said dryly. Ms. Thorne, your response? Agatha stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her arms. She walked to the podium and placed a single thumb drive on the clerk's desk. Your Honor, Agatha said, her voice cool and crisp. The plaintiff alleges that Eleanor Sterling was incompetent when she established Deep Lake Holdings 5 years ago. We would like to submit into evidence to Exhibit A, the neurological evaluation of Eleanor Sterling, dated 2 days prior to the incorporation of Deep Lake. She nodded to the clerk, who keyed up the video on the large monitors mounted on the walls. The room went quiet. On the screen, Eleanor Sterling appeared. She was sitting in a doctor's office. A man in a white coat was conducting a cognitive test. Mrs. Sterling, what is the year? The doctor asked. It is 2021, Eleanor replied sharply. And if you ask me who the president is, I am walking out of here. I am here to certify my sanity, doctor, not to play trivia. A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Very well, the doctor said. Can you explain why you are here today? Eleanor looked directly at the camera. Her eyes were clear, fierce, and terrifyingly intelligent. I am about to separate the intellectual property of my company into a separate holding entity, she said clearly. I am doing this to protect the future of the business from the short-sighted greed of my son. Marcus, I am fully aware of the value of these assets. I am fully aware of the legal implications, and I am doing this of my own free will. While I am sound of mind and body. The video cut to black. Silence. Agatha turned to Harland. She doesn't sound confused to me. Richard, she sounds like she knows exactly who she is dealing with. Harland tugged at his collar. Objection. That video is 5 years old. Her condition could have deteriorated. We have annual updates, Agatha said, stacking 4 more drives on the table. Every year, right up until the week she died. Would you like to watch those too? Or shall we move on to the character of the plaintiffs? Harland sat down, looking flushed. Marcus leaned over and whispered something furious into his ear. Your Honor. Agatha continued. The plaintiff claims my client is a predator. They claim moral superiority. However, we have evidence that suggests the only predatory behavior in this family comes from the plaintiff's table. Objection, Harland shouted. Relevance. It goes to the credibility of the witnesses. Your Honor. Agatha said smoothly, if the plaintiffs are willing to commit felonies to secure these assets, surely their testimony regarding the will is suspect. Judge Vance narrowed his eyes. Felonies? Ms. Thorne? That is a strong word. It is, Agatha agreed. We submit Exhibit B. The screen flickered again. This time, it was the grainy night vision footage from my apartment hallway. The courtroom gasped as they watched 2 men in tactical gear pick my lock and enter my apartment. The timestamp was clearly visible. This break-in occurred 3 days ago, Agatha narrated. Nothing was stolen. The intruders were looking for specific documents related to the estate. You can't prove who sent them, Harland shouted. This is circumstantial. True, Agatha said. But this is not... She signaled the clerk. The audio recording played. Pierce's voice filled the room. loud and clear. "There is a server room in there. If that server room overheats and the data is lost, then there is no proof of ownership. $50,000. Sully. Cash." The sound of the car peeling away echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom. Every head in the room turned to look at Pierce Sterling. He was white as a sheet. He looked like he was about to vomit. Marcus was staring at his son with a look of pure horror, not concern, but the horror of a man watching his escape vehicle explode. "That is doctored," Pierce stammered, standing up. "That's AI. I never said that." "Sit down. Mr. Sterling," Judge Vance roared, banging his gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." Harland was frantically flipping through his papers, looking for a lifeline. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. These are allegations for a criminal court, not a probate hearing." "They establish a pattern of conduct," Agatha said. "They establish that the plaintiffs knew Deep Lake Holdings was valid, and they tried to destroy the evidence rather than contest it legally. It proves bad faith." The reporters were typing furiously on their phones. This was already the story of the decade, the Sterling family, caught on tape ordering arson. But Agatha wasn't done. She walked back to our table and picked up the final envelope, the one with the red seal. "However, Your Honor," Agatha said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "all of this is secondary. The video proves sanity, the audio proves malice, but none of it matters because of the document I am holding right now." She held the envelope up. "Mr. Harland filed a lawsuit challenging the ownership of Deep Lake Holdings. In doing so, he made a fatal error. He failed to read the full articles of incorporation." Marcus was staring at the envelope. He looked like he was trying to remember something, trying to piece together a puzzle he had missed. "What is that?" Harlan asked, his voice trembling slightly. "This," Agatha announced, "is the non-contestability covenant of the Deep Lake Trust, also known as the Black Swan Clause." She handed the document to the bailiff, who ran it up to the judge. Judge Vance put on his reading glasses. He read the paragraph, then he read it again. He looked up at Marcus Sterling, and for the first time, there was no annoyance in his eyes. There was only pity. "Read it into the record, Ms. Thorne," the judge said. Agatha turned to face the room. She looked directly at Marcus. "The clause states, in order to ensure the stability and independence of Deep Lake Holdings, any beneficiary of the primary estate of Eleanor Sterling who initiates legal action to challenge, annul, or undermine the ownership of said holdings shall be in immediate breach of the conditional terms of the primary will." She paused. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "It continues," Agatha said, her voice ringing out like a bell. "Upon the filing of such action, all bequests, trusts, and assets granted to said beneficiary under the primary will, including voting shares in Sterling Maritime, real estate holdings, and liquid cash assets, shall be immediately forfeited and transferred to the Sterling Charitable Foundation for the Preservation of Great Lakes Marine Life." The room didn't gasp. It stopped breathing. Marcus stood up. He moved like a puppet with cut strings. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. You filed the suit." "Marcus?" I spoke up for the first time. My voice was calm, cutting through the shock. "You challenged the ownership. You triggered the clause." "It's a trap," Marcus shouted, his face turning a violent shade of red. "It's a trick. She couldn't do that." "She did," Agatha said, "and you walked right into it." Harland was on his feet, sweating profusely. "Your Honor, we move to withdraw the suit. We withdraw the complaint immediately. It was a mistake." Judge Vance shook his head slowly. "Mr. Harland," the judge said, his voice heavy with the finality of the law. "The clause is triggered upon the initiation of legal action. You filed the complaint on Tuesday. You have stood here for an hour arguing the merits of the case. The action has been initiated. You cannot unring the bell." "But my client didn't know," Harlan pleaded. He wasn't aware of the clause. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Judge Vance snapped. And ignorance of a contract you are suing over is not a defense. It is incompetence. The judge looked down at Marcus. Mr. Sterling, under the terms of your mother's will, terms she clearly wrote anticipating exactly this kind of greed, you have forfeited your inheritance, the $50 million, the company shares, the title. He looked at Rosalind. And Mrs. Sterling, since you are a named party in this suit, the real estate portfolio is also forfeited. He looked at Pierce. And Mr. Sterling, your trust fund and the automobile collection, gone. This is insane, Pierce screamed. You can't do this. That's my money. It was never your money, son, Judge Vance said coldly. It was Eleanor's money, and she decided you didn't deserve it if you couldn't respect her wishes. The judge banged his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot ending a life. Motion to dismiss the plaintiff's claim is granted with prejudice. The countersuit regarding the Black Swan Clause is upheld. The court orders the immediate freezing of all assets listed in the primary will for transfer to the charitable foundation. Bailiffs, please secure the courtroom. Pandemonium erupted. The press broke through the barrier. Shouting questions. Flashbulbs blinded the room. I sat still. I watched them. Marcus collapsed into his chair. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like an old, broken man who had just realized he had spent his life climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. He had lost the company. He had lost the fortune. He had lost everything because he couldn't let me have a tackle box. Rosalind was sobbing, her face buried in her hands, her social standing evaporating in real time. Pierce was arguing with a bailiff, looking around wildly as if expecting someone to come save him. Agatha closed her folder. She looked at me and smiled. That went well, she said. I looked at Marcus one last time. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the chaotic courtroom. There was no hate left in them, only shock and fear. I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just picked up my bag. Let's go. Agatha, I said. I have a company to run. We walked down the center aisle, parting the sea of reporters. Behind me, I heard Harlan shouting at his client, blaming everyone but himself. I heard Pierce crying. I heard the ruin of the Sterling family. But I kept walking. I walked out of the courtroom, down the marble hallway, and out into the bright, cold Chicago sunlight. The air tasted clean. It tasted like the lake. It tasted like freedom. The silence that follows the destruction of an empire is not empty. It is heavy. It is filled with the settling of dust and the echo of things that used to be powerful hitting the ground. In the weeks following the verdict, the Sterling family did not just fall. They disintegrated. It was a spectacle of such absolute ruin that even the tabloids eventually stopped reporting on it because it became too depressing to watch. The Black Swan Clause was efficient. It stripped Marcus, Rosalind, and Pierce of every asset derived from Grandma's will. The $50 million, the real estate portfolio, the vintage cars, all of it was seized by the court-appointed trustees and transferred immediately to the Sterling Charitable Foundation. Overnight, the foundation became one of the largest environmental benefactors in the Midwest, funded entirely by the greed of the people who had tried to destroy it. But the loss of money was just the beginning. Agatha and I did not stop with the civil suit. We handed the insurance policy, Sully's hard drive, to the district attorney. The investigation into Marcus was swift and brutal. The evidence of the falsified emissions reports and the ignored safety protocols on the Sterling Titan was irrefutable. Marcus tried to blame his subordinates, just as we predicted, but the email chains were too clear. He was indicted on 12 counts of corporate fraud and environmental negligence. The man who had sneered at me for being a garbage collector was now facing 10 years in a federal facility, stripped of his title, his reputation, and his freedom. Pierce fared no better. The recording of him trying to bribe Sully to burn down the warehouse was played on every news station in Chicago. He was arrested for attempted arson, bribery, and breaking and entering, Without his trust fund, he could not afford the high-powered defense team he was used to. He was currently sitting in county jail, awaiting trial, represented by a public defender who looked even more tired than I was. And Rosalind, poor, haughty Rosalind. Her fall was perhaps the most quiet, which made it the most pathetic. When the news broke that the real estate portfolio was gone, her creditors descended like locusts. Her fashion line had been hemorrhaging money for years, propped up only by sterling capital. When the tap ran dry, the loans were called in. She lost the penthouse. She lost the Hamptons estate. She was last seen moving into a small, two-bedroom condo in a neighborhood she wouldn't have driven through 6 months ago. The friends who had pressured the museum to fire me vanished the moment her checkbook did. They tried to reach out, of course, when the reality of their situation set in. The phone calls started. I watched my phone screen light up with names that used to terrify me. Uncle Marcus calling Aunt Rosalind, calling Pierce, jail collect call. They left voicemails. I listened to a few of them, just to remind myself why I had done this. The tone had shifted remarkably. There were no more threats, no more demands. "Darlene, honey," Rosalind's voice crackled, thick with tears and cheap wine. "We are family. You can't let your uncle go to prison. We were just grieving. We didn't mean it. Please, pick up. We can work something out." "Darlene," Marcus said in another, his voice shaking. "I am your father's brother. Eleanor wouldn't have wanted this. She believed in forgiveness." I deleted them. They were right about one thing. Eleanor believed in forgiveness, but she also believed in consequences. You forgive the child who breaks a vase. You do not forgive the arsonist who tries to burn down the house. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their emails. I blocked their lawyers. It was the digital equivalent of closing a heavy steel door and turning the lock. I did not keep everything. Deep Lake Holdings was a behemoth, too large for one person to manage. And frankly, I had no desire to be a billionaire shipping magnate. I sat down with Agatha and Sully, and we drafted a new future for the company. I identified the patents that were purely profit-driven, the ones Marcus had coveted for their quick returns, and I sold them. I sold them to legitimate competitors for a sum that was staggering, yet significantly less than what Marcus would have squeezed out of them. That cash influx gave me liquidity. I used that money to rehire the crew of the Sterling Titan and pay for the repairs Marcus had skipped. I set up a pension fund for the dock workers that was actually solvent. I pivoted the core of Deep Lake Holdings entirely toward green maritime technology. We weren't just holding the patents anymore. We were licensing them at affordable rates to smaller fleets, forcing the entire industry to modernize. I wasn't building an empire to rule the world. I was building a system to clean it up. And then, I went shopping. I did not buy a penthouse in the Gold Coast. I did not buy a villa in Tuscany. I bought a house on the northern edge of Lake Michigan, 3 hours away from the city. It was not the Sterling estate. It was Grandma's old fishing cabin, the one where we had spent those summer mornings. It had been sold out of the family years ago, during one of Marcus's previous cash crunches, and had fallen into disrepair. I bought it back. I spent the next 6 months doing what I did best. I restored it. I stripped the cheap vinyl siding the previous owners had installed to reveal the original cedar logs underneath. I sanded the floors by hand, bringing the grain of the white pine back to life. I fixed the stone chimney. I replaced the rotted beams on the dock. I worked with my hands every day. I went home with sawdust in my hair and paint under my fingernails. I was exhausted, sore, and completely, utterly happy. There were no reporters here, no lawyers, no boardroom battles, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the waves lapping against the shore. One morning, late in autumn, when the air was crisp enough to see your breath, I walked down to the dock. I carried the tackle box. It did not look like the rusted piece of junk Arthur Vance had placed on the boardroom table. I had restored it, too. I had removed the rust, stabilized the metal, and sealed it with a clear, matte protective coat. It still bore the scars of its age, the dents, the scratches, but they were no longer wounds. They were history. It looked like what it was, a survivor. I sat on the edge of the dock, letting my legs dangle over the cold water. I placed the box beside me and popped the latch. Snap! The sound was clean and sharp. The false bottom was gone. The magnetic key was gone. The coordinates were gone. Inside the trays, sitting where the rusty lures used to be, were my new tools, calipers, fine point brushes, a small notebook filled with sketches for a new line of ergonomic furniture I was designing, and a photo of my father and Grandma Eleanor, laughing on this very dock, holding up a string of perch. I looked out at the water. It was vast and gray, stretching out to the horizon where it met the sky. For a long time, I had thought that winning meant taking what they had. I thought victory was the $1,000,000 check, the CEO title, the public vindication, and I had achieved all of that. I had beaten them at their own game. But as I sat there, listening to the silence, I realized that was not the real victory. The real revenge was not that Marcus was in prison or that Rosalind was broke. The real revenge was that I was here, and I was free. I was free from their expectations. I was free from their judgment. I was free from the desperate, clawing hunger for more that had consumed them. They had spent their lives chasing a horizon they could never catch, terrified of losing things they never really owned. I owned this moment. I owned the air in my lungs. I owned the work of my hands. Grandma was right. The biggest fish lies in the deep. She hadn't just left me a company. She had left me a lesson. She taught me that the most powerful thing you can do in a world of screaming narcissists is to be quiet, competent, and content. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single. Old lure. It was the minnow with the hidden coordinates. I had kept it as a souvenir. I rubbed my thumb over the silver paint. It had served its purpose. It had led me through the storm. I pulled my arm back and tossed it. It flew through the air, a silver arc against the gray sky, and landed in the water with a soft plip. Ripples spread out from the point of impact, circles widening, expanding, moving outward until they faded into the rhythm of the waves. The water returned to stillness. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and cold water. A smile spread across my face. It was not the triumphant smirk of a conqueror. It was the soft, easy smile of someone who has finally put down a heavy weight after a long walk. I was Darlene Wainwright. I was a restorer. And for the first time in 100 years of sterling history, the family legacy was not a burden. It was a clean slate. I closed the tackle box, picked it up, and walked back up the path toward the house, where the lights were warm and the door was unlocked, ready to start my own story. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment your location below. Share your thoughts on Darlene's journey, and if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Sunday Drama Stories channel, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.